Hi everyone. Welcome. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes and then we're going to get started with the session. Thank you so much for your patience. Just wait about 30 seconds more before we begin.
Hello everyone, my name is Patrick Obonyo and I'm delighted that you chose to join this convening. I'm here today representing the IKEA Foundation. At the foundation, we work to help families create a better life while protecting the planet. We are committed to tackling some of the root causes of inequality while simultaneously addressing the causes and effects of climate change. We believe that families need both financial stability and a healthy environment if they and their children are to thrive. And for us, improving livelihoods and protecting the planet are inseparable. One of the ways in which we hope to improve people's livelihoods while protecting the planet is by supporting green entrepreneurs that create meaningful jobs with climate-smart solutions. We fund our partners to help nurture and grow scalable green enterprises that help people and communities build livelihoods and support their families. We also want to advance bold collaborations to cultivate dialogue, scale solutions, and influence policy towards creating a better world for the many people. We are committed to amplifying the voices of partners to ensure a fair, inclusive, and balanced debate around these issues. That is why we're delighted today to join you in this ANDE South Asia convening. We see this as an opportunity to unearth different perspectives and foment dialogue in these areas. The IKEA Foundation has been supporting ANDE to understand and catalyze the green entrepreneurship ecosystem. As part of this, we are funding research that will help us and other stakeholders understand the status quo of green enterprises across India and Kenya to gain insights that will help build more effective and impactful programming. We are also pleased to offer support to ANDE's Climate Action Labs, as we do believe that the complex challenges we face today can only be solved by different stakeholders coming together to bring their creativity and resources to the table. Thank you once again for joining the ANDE team today. and we hope this is the beginning of many more regional dialogues towards greater impact. Thank you.
All right. Thank you and welcome everybody to this session that is going to be discussing innovations in early stage climate finance. As moderator today, joining us is Simi Serene, who is a director at Unitus Capital. Simi has over 23 years of experience in financial services with extensive expertise in supporting access to capital for sustainable startups and social enterprises. She's also recognized as a thought leader for impact investing and climate finance in India. And with no further ado, I would like to hand this discussion over into the able hands of Simi Serene. Simi, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Cypria. And thanks everyone attending. Very excited to be here. As Cypria mentioned, we do a lot of work at Unitus and Climate, the organizations that I run, in supporting access to capital for climate businesses. And I'm very fortunate to be joined today by a stellar panel of both investors. We start with our first panelist, Priya Shah, who is a very active climate investor through her fund Thea Ventures. Priya, would love to understand more about the work that you are doing, as well as the opportunities and challenges that you see in early stage climate investing.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Simi, for having me, and really pleased to be here with such an esteemed group of panelists. So our fund is essentially a seed stage climate fund. We look at all technology-led, IP-led businesses operating with a climate tech lens across various different sectors at the pre-Series A and seed stages. So we funded 4 companies in our portfolio. We launched last year, and we funded companies across grid innovation, sustainable materials, battery tech, and mobility. In terms of opportunities and challenges, in the climate tech ecosystem, especially in the early stage, I think it's a really exciting time to be a founder in this space. I think there's a lot of exciting regulatory support, especially in sectors like mobility and renewables. And climate has really come to the forefront of the discussion. So sustainability is being integrated across various different sectors, going beyond just the energy transition, so across materials and packaging and fashion and the carbon markets, as well as green hydrogen and biofuels, prop tech, and other sectors. So it's really cross-cutting across many different thematic areas. And I think it's going to be a massive push over the next 2 to 3 decades in India. And I think in India, we have the advantage of a huge amount of natural resources, whether it's forests or oceans or carbon sinks. We also have access to great talent and great skills. Founders are becoming smarter and much more sharper in the way that they're going about starting businesses and creating sustainable, longevity-oriented business models. And also we have a good sort of policy regulatory support in favor of climate tech and sort of the net zero transition, which has been pledged by the government last year at COP26 and reinforced through various different policies like the battery swapping policy, the green hydrogen policy, and other carbon amendment acts that have been passed as well. So I think that's quite exciting. In terms of the challenges, just to quickly touch on them, and I'm sure our panelists will also would love to hear from them as well. But one of the things that that we see is sort of the access to late stage capital. It's still a little bit of a question mark right now for climate tech investing. So since the sector has been up and running, I think for about 2 to 3 years, really with the big push in electric mobility, I think there's a lot of early stage capital, a lot of excitement and enthusiasm between early stage investors, but really getting past the Series A and Series B rounds and proving out those models to scale and to kind of really seeing strong level execution is something that still needs to be there. So I think it would be great to see much more larger funders coming in to sort of solve this issue. And the second second point really is around the nature of these businesses is not sort of very similar to sort of what we've seen in venture investing previously. So, the sort of quick exits and the sort of shorter gestation periods that you have with B2B SaaS, enterprise SaaS, and the software-driven models, I think doesn't necessarily translate in climate tech, where you have, sort of hardware and manufacturing and a lot of these capex-heavy businesses, which is the nature of climate adaptation and resilience solutions that are really there to make a long-term impact. So that's something that most likely would need to see a shift in the venture mindset to be able to sort of really be holding on to these investments for a bit longer and having that comfort level in approaching that entire investment thesis. So that's just a little bit of a brief from my end.
That's certainly exciting time for climate tech. Now, obviously, Priya, you mentioned like a wide variety of segments, but I do know that one segment that gets less attention than mitigation is definitely adaptation, which is, I'm very excited to have Samir Shishodia here from Rainmatter Foundation, who I believe are, very focused on adaptation and climate resilience as part of the investment thesis. Samir, would love to hear your thoughts on the work that you're doing at Rainmatter, and similar to Priya, question to you as well on what challenges, opportunities you see in early stage climate investing.
Thanks, Ivy. Delighted to be here. I think this is a very important conversation to have, not just from the climate financing and funding point of view, but also from the definitional point of view. In fact, we started taking a whole systems approach to climate early on. We are both a foundation and we do investments as well. So in some cases, we have split our investment into a particular problem, is how we look at it, into both grants for institution building and investments into the entrepreneurship bits of it. Because we believe it takes the village. We are looking at a very large set of problems. In many cases, the ecosystems that usually support an entrepreneur don't exist. The laws and policy are not necessarily in sync with it, unlike for a business SaaS outfit. And even the distinction between adaptation and mitigation sometimes starts to meld a little when you start to look at the problem from a whole systems lens. So Priya was spot on that it needs a big shift in the mindsets of folks financing this. It definitely needs to be patient. It needs to be long-term. It also needs to account for, I believe, the adjacencies of a problem, because the problem landscape itself is not very, very well understood. If you, for instance, focus on EVs as a standalone investment, you need to account for the context in which they're used, the policies that they link up with, and so on and so forth. And at the very least, a dialogue with other players, with other parts of the ecosystem are very much necessary, even if you are not driving it. In our foundation, of course, we do engage with folks dealing with policy, on-ground organizations, and so on and so forth. And I believe a shared understanding of what the climate problems look like, because it is a problem first, and within the problem lie opportunities. But it is a problem first, and we need to understand the problem in a certain way. We need to share our goals and indicators on this, and look at each of our investments, each of our efforts as a small piece of the large puzzle.
Thanks, Amir. But definitely, I think from an investor perspective, hearing both Priya and Samir, this is a large opportunity. It's an opportunity that investors are looking to put capital behind. Is that, Pratap, your sense as well? At Climate Collective, you are supporting early stage entrepreneurs and skilling them or supporting them, mentoring them to grow and build their businesses. What is your sense of the funding landscape you're seeing from an entrepreneur's perspective? Is it exciting? Are you seeing challenges and gaps? Where are you in your thought process?
Right, thank you, Simi, and it's always great to be on these platforms with Andy. You do such great work. I can share what I've seen over the last 6 years. When we started Climate Collective in 2016 with our first solar hackathon, there was, I don't know, maybe 100 startups, technology startups, I should say, in climate. And today, from our research, we estimate about 2,500. It has been absolutely explosive, at least on the ground. but not surprising. So in 2019, when I was talking to some incubator, NIT Trichy, 2019 or early 2020, she was telling me her entire portfolio then was 100% clean tech, even though it wasn't making news. We didn't really feel it on the investment side, et cetera. And I knew this just from talking at the early stage product development. There is a fundamental shift on the entrepreneurship side. Now, if you talk to investors in 2019, or sorry, 16, 17, most people would tell me there's more exciting opportunities. But even more than that, this is not a role for investors. The government should step in, et cetera, right? Even though globally we started to see funds started to flow into clean tech again after the, in what we call clean tech 2.0 for about 2013, 14. But even in 2019, I was talking to one of the large angel investment groups, and they were telling me, sorry, early 2020, this was just a month before COVID, the number one focus of their angel investors was sustainability. And this was amongst the largest angel networks. So I think what we're starting to see now on the ground is actually things that have started to build over the last 3-4 years. Today, we have an angel network called Climate Angels Network. We have 81 registered local, regional, and global VCs. And we have tons of people wanting to talk and ask about deal flow in climate. And this is a function, not particularly of climate, but of India 2022. It's a very strong, rich set of institutional players who've been looking at startups for getting close to 15 plus years. And I think what we've seen is because this dynamism on the capital side, and especially later stage capital side, is quite exciting and to some degree even surprising. I can understand the larger players. We know the larger players have, like for example, Sequoia has a large presence in clean tech in the US, you know, and naturally they're geared to look for deals in India as well. What I'm surprised is, for example, how much cross-border capital is interested in deals in here in India and Asia as well. And that's again, perhaps because of the sophistication of the investment ecosystem. And we know that there's something about clean tech that has fundamentally changed for opportunities that the other panelists have mentioned. And it's just starting, in my opinion. There's such a transformation needed across industries that I think there is a view that opportunities will continue to grow, and especially so in India and the global south, where the innovation side is just starting. So in fact, I would say there isn't that much challenge for the especially Series A and above capital that could come to climate tech. I think it's just the deal flow coming. There's increasing less challenge in pre-Series A. There's a lot of deals. I saw some data in the beginning of this year suggesting climate tech was already a leading recipient of VC funds, or sorry, investment funds for early stage deals. I think I saw that data in January. So we'll be top 2 or top 3, maybe even more this year in early stage investment into clean tech startups, right? That tells us many things, that it's capital is being formed nicely. We have people like Priya, who's already organized and supporting ecosystem and investments since her fund started last year as well. I think the challenges we see are, for example, beyond the general pale of clean tech, you know, the EVs, some of the ag tech. There's a lot of areas on water and wastewater, and we struggle to find more than 5 good investors, early stage investors that have the interest and expertise here, for example. So I think one thing we could see and perhaps is needed is a deepening or a deepening, widening of the investor base into other aspects of clean tech. We did receive a grant from Levelson Foundation a few months ago. We're happy to say to help provide technical due diligence services to more investors in these harder to invest to fund domains in clean tech. So I think if I'm an optimist, I guess you have to be. But I think we will solve it. But I think this is screaming out today where we can focus our efforts is beyond where the private sector is already starting to come in.
Thanks, Pratap. Shamal, let me turn to you next. As part of PFAN and supporting entrepreneurs in Bangladesh, are you seeing similar trends in Bangladesh as we're seeing in India? What are your thoughts on the investment opportunities in your region?
Shamal, I think
you're
you're
on
on
mute.
Thanks, Ajay.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Simi. Actually, in Bangladesh, PFAN is supporting since 2014, and PFAN is not only supporting climate change mitigation projects, but as well as adaptation projects as well. And in adaptation, we support from all kinds of projects such as agriculture, forestry, water, health, ecotourism, ecosystem development, urban development, and waste. So all these kind of projects are actually considered under the adaptation projects. Um, and PFAN, let me just tell you a little bit brief about PFAN. PFAN is a network of climate and clean energy professionals, and we actually support climate and clean energy projects in investment readiness and investment facilitation. So on the one hand, we deal with very early stage projects as well, and on the other hand, we also deal with SMEs and large scale projects. So predominantly our projects are mostly in the clean energy space, and PFAN globally has raised almost supported to raise finance more than $2 billion and supported more than 1,000 projects. But in the adaptation space, we actually struggle to find projects in Bangladesh. Although Bangladesh is one of the leading countries in the world to adopt adaptation strategies such as Bangladesh Climate Change Strategies and Action Plan, and also one of the pioneer country to set up a Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund of $300 million. And for that reason, Bangladesh was also given a Climate Champion Award. But being the pioneer in the adaptation space, still when we are trying to find out projects in the private sector, we really struggle to find. Even we met the top adaptation practitioners, but we actually, it's a mostly government-led projects, and the Climate Change Trust Fund, there a lot of projects was funded, but actually all the projects went to government-led projects. So so we really struggled, but we eventually we got a few projects in the smart aquaculture and waste projects, and one of our project, smart aquaculture, was actually showcased in the Adaptation Fund Climate Innovation Accelerator Global Framework, a global webinar. But it is not a typical startup. It is a you can define it as a SME. So, but from Bangladesh, we have supported a very innovative startup like SaltShare and the SolarEek. But in the adaptation space, it's yet to find any kind of such projects. The main reason is lack of awareness, and adaptation is not easy to understand because mitigation is well known, and there are a lot of donor agencies are supporting private sector mitigation projects like solar, renewable energies. But in the private sector, it's really the lack of knowledge and know-how, and that what kind of private sector-led adaptation projects can happen. And also it's a lack of policy level from the government side, because they yet to budget their adaptation finance, and where private sector actually can participate. But from our research and from our own activities, we understand that there is a huge opportunity in Bangladesh in the adaptation space in the aquaculture and agriculture area. And we would really love to collaborate with the accelerators like in this space, so that we can actually originate projects. And PFAN has a very good network with the investors, and we know our investors, what kind of areas they want to finance, what kind of geography, but what we lack is actually originate mostly in the adaptation startup projects. So that's all from my side. Thank you, Simi.
Thanks, Shamal. Now, I think one thing's very clear, obviously, from everyone's comments is that the ecosystem itself needs to be both broader and deeper. In fact, we did a research a few months ago that showed that India
Simi, you're breaking up. I'm wondering if maybe it will help if you
$1 billion in
turned
the
your
next climate
video.
goals. That funding is to go in energy, but also adapt new innovative sectors. Like that, is this any better? So Charissa, can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much better, Simi.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Fantastic. So I think I'll just, go on to my next question for all the panelists actually on, what do you think specifically needs to happen? Is it policy? Is it advocacy? Is it to make the ecosystem both broader in terms of kind of sectors that are getting funded, as well as deeper in terms of funding, not just small seed stage rounds, but also then making sure that those companies get supported all the way through Series A and B and C and D. Priya, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot for the question. I do think there's a role of multiple different stakeholders coming together to help support the climate tech ecosystem. So obviously policy advocacy is part of it. Having access to government grants and schemes is definitely a different source of capital for these startups. And grant capital can obviously be used for R&D purposes and for innovation and testing and impact-led projects as well. There's also a role of banks and non-dilutive capital as well, NBFCs, banks, venture debt, etc., which has historically not funded, companies that are at very, very early stages. But potentially, if we can open up those avenues as well, that could be quite unique. I do think one piece is interesting in the climate tech space, which has, sort of really succeeded in the US, is basically these R&D innovations that are now in labs, let's say in some of the largest universities in the US, and being incubated, have so much support when they come out of the lab and are getting towards commercialization. And we're not seeing that same amount of, lab to market innovation scale happening in India. And I think that is really something that's quite needed in the climate tech space. So whether it's in battery chemistry or in, in any kind of sort of infrastructure projects or any even green hydrogen and these other sort of long-term technologies that are used to replace chemical burners, etc. I think we need to see a lot more capital and support and sort of corporate action as well, going into commercializing these ventures at the very, very lab stage, basically, and then making sure that there's a ready list of clients available to basically bring these innovations to market and then scale them up as quickly as possible. And so that piece in terms of the academia, the universities, and the incubation labs, I think is something that could be strengthened and could be worked on. And that's where I think we would see a lot of progress coming out of this in this particular space.
Samir, if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, thanks. I think, and I'm repeating myself a little here. I think how we look at both entrepreneurship as well as the funding patterns need a dramatic rethink, more in sync with the problem itself. We are unlikely to solve climate through micro tweaks at the energy transition and the logistics transition level itself. There are some very fundamental energy efficiency, for instance, local production consumption loops, parts of the circular economy. These are massively ignored. And I think a lot of the small growing businesses will be in these spaces. How businesses are organized, for instance, at Rainmatter, we very specifically shy away from very hard moats for the businesses, and we are looking at how they can actually represent a large dent in the problem. They could be how they create an ecosystem around it, how there's an IP transition. Uh, these are some of the strategies that we've seen. But it's very important that the solutions actually represent the largest dent in the problem and not just an opportunity for that particular entrepreneur. There are some fantastic ways in which adaptation is enabled by a business. We have invested in one such business, which is helping a large set of a large hinterland around the business itself um, arrive at adaptation measures as part of its primary business focus. So I think how we look at businesses, how we look at innovation, and how we look at funding itself from both the time scale and the returns perspective has to evolve in itself. And of course, there's policy shifts needed. Of course, this dialogue has to be had with governments, with policy think tanks, and so on and so forth. It's something that's beyond the pale of, I would say, one funding organization or one entrepreneur, and it does need a larger convening for that.
Pratap, your thoughts on this?
Kind of forgot the question, but okay. So what
the specific interventions that you think are needed?
What is needed? Here's my experience. Right. So I think what I've seen over the last 6 years in particular, and last 10 years outside of India as well, is people have shifted the idea of CSR, government, or philanthropy being the drivers of change. What we've seen is certain that there could be a complementary fit with startups in business. Now, I'll give you an example. Is when I start a lot of workshops, I ask the question, what's the largest circular economy startup in the world? And normally people can't name it, or I don't give too many options. In my opinion, it's one of them is Uber, Ola. They take existing stock, repurpose it to increase utilization, reducing the production of more taxis. Sounds pretty circular to me. When they provide their customer value proposition, why do I use Ola or Uber? It's not about circular economy. It's I need a taxi and I need it fast. So when we start our workshops, I think one thing, and this could also apply in particular to adaptation and resilience. We ran an accelerator last year in Africa for adaptation and resilience, is we start with this question, or we start with this thought. I know it's maybe a little unfair. I don't mean to be too controversial. Nobody cares about the climate. So start your value proposition to see what problem you're solving, right? If climate is a benefit, right, that's great. Just like in the case of Ola and Uber. We may see that, for example, we build sustainable startups, meaning they're surviving not on grants, but they have their revenue model from some value they create to a customer. And impact is correlated with scale, right? And that's something that when I started, a lot of startups came to and said, if the government gave me this money, we could solve this problem, right? This was in the early first few years when I see a lot of startups, business models. They came from a product background, especially in areas like environment, et cetera. Turned out the government was not the big buyer of these solutions, but that was not really unknown at the time. It was just a hope for what we thought was alignment. What we're starting to see is that a lot of startups can find market value, whether for retail or whether for business. In India, it's mostly business, B2B startups. And if you can create that as your key driver, right? I think what we can see is a lot of solutions, even in areas as difficult as adaptation and resilience, can find ways to grow and reach the impact that we all need as well. So that, excuse me, there's other things needed. Of course, there's always policy, especially in areas like waste, a stronger EPR, faster EPR plan. All this is very good and necessary in some cases. But I believe, especially in the startup world, in clean tech, if we can really harness the talents that are there in product innovation or market innovation and really help them in building these business models, getting maybe those grants needed to get to the next stage before the private sector can crowd in, I think we can also do a great job in making a dent in this in the impact we need.
So basically, the business models that make sense. And I know Shamal, you already said that the same thing, that there is investor support, but more businesses need to exist. Any further thoughts, Shamal, that you have on what else is needed to make the system stronger for climate capital to flow in?
Yeah, thank you, Simi. Yeah, as I mentioned before, actually, government policies needs to be supportive for the private sector business as well. For example, there were several mini grids established in Bangladesh, but so after a couple of years, government actually expanded their grid into that mini grid area, so how they can survive. So that is one example. So actually, yeah, there are some opportunities where so government intervention is not needed as a purely private business, but if you see adaptation, and Bangladesh is the most vulnerable country, one of the most vulnerable countries to adaptation, and most of the areas are like protection from cyclones and other things, natural calamities. So where the actually government support is obvious, but some of the areas where like agriculture and aquaculture, Bangladesh is the largest aquaculture. So aquaculture is a huge opportunity for Bangladesh, and also in the water sector, because of salinity in the south coastal belt, lot of migration is happening, and people are shifting towards the sweetwater pond areas. So where private sector actually can play a big role, and for Bangladesh, we don't need to innovate products or something like that. It's about a business model that works, and the bringing in private sector, and bringing in private capital, and bringing in policies and support from the government to sustain that business that is required. And from the other side, to originate business, I think a platform like this should be focusing and helping to build awareness that the opportunities of the private sector in the climate adaptation business is very important. I think that seriously lacks in Bangladesh. So that's my thoughts. Thank you, Simi.
Samir, you had a point.
Yeah, so I think one thing that the government can do, not just from the entrepreneurial point of view, but larger economic shift point of view, is and it's happening in small cases for restoration and stuff like that, is account for PS services, for PS, payment for ecosystem services. If we can start pushing for models which account for more carbon, or better water management, more circularity, and so on and so forth, and we can accrue value for that, economic value for that in explicit ways. If we can enable policies towards that, I think that'll let a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of private players participate better, because now you create a market for it, or now you create a economic incentive for it. Because as it stands today, the gun's loaded against all of these parameters. The gun's loaded against climate parameters as it is. If the entrepreneur has to compete largely on economic criteria, and I would disagree that Uber in India has actually helped the climate cause in any manner, for instance. I think we're not going to get there just on the base of how we do economics today.
Got it. No, I think in fact, which is why one thing we'd asked all of you, before this panel, and Cypria, if you could share the output of this as well, was the question regarding what could the ecosystem do, apart from what the government can do, right? What do we need to build as a shared goals? And common understanding among all of us, be it investors, be it entrepreneur support organizations, the founders, so that the ecosystem itself becomes stronger. And as you can see, there are a bunch of goals that I think fairly common, that we all agree on, could push more capital, more support towards climate tech ecosystem as a whole. I do want to go to you for final thoughts on these, but maybe Cyprian, we could take some questions before that. I see we have a lot of audience questions. So if we can start with those. So the first one we have is, are there sectors in climate space receiving more early stage capital than others? Pratap, I know you work with hundreds of entrepreneurs. Are there specific sectors that you're seeing that are becoming more investor favorites than others?
Right. Yeah. The first thing, of course, is what we're seeing in India mirrors generally the funding patterns globally. Mobility taking the large share of funding, both because of the amount of capital it can absorb, as well as the fact that there's a lot of easier business cases. So a lot of the B2B solutions here in India, shared fleets, all this stuff, seem to be very attractive investors. Maybe also because it's easier to relate to investors. I mean, investors also need to be aware of new sectors and understand how models work. So that's nothing different. We do see a lot, of course, on the agri-tech side, especially in this context around climate smart agriculture. And again, because there are use cases, business-led use cases. So I think investors in generally follow what's scalable, and scalable oftentimes is when you don't have government, CSR, anything, these words around business models, I mean, very bluntly. That's not a statement that one is preferred over the other. We need both. The market can't solve everything for sure. That's not what I mean. I'm talking about the private investment sector. I do see, for example, some trends coming up, at least in terms of the innovation. It's alternative to meat and alternative protein, all this stuff. This could be quite exciting because that also has a strong impact on the climate as well. I think it's still early days to see how a lot of these other sectors in climate, how long it'll take before they get market acceptance. That's always the challenge, but it is deepening, definitely for sure.
Thanks, Pratap. I guess let me take Nishit's question next, which is about, since a lot of funding is today focused on mitigation, what drivers can accelerate adaptation funding or adaptation innovation funding? Samir, your thoughts on that maybe?
Thanks. We do believe that adaptation will be a lot in the local context. So businesses which actually work in local contexts, either work in local consumer production loops and scale these loops, scale in a hub and spoke manner how they expand, or represent local production centers in the market, while strengthening adaptation measures in the local economies in terms of linkages with biodiversity, linkages with better water management, linkages with a larger set of livelihoods, because these are very core to adaptation. We tend to focus on the disaster part of the climate story in terms of adaptation, in terms of heat resilience and so on and so forth. But there are some very fundamental building blocks that need to exist in a place, and businesses can play a huge role on this. In fact, any solution that's rolled out needs institutional support and oversight, but it needs entrepreneurial energy and activity to sustain in the long run. So I think both of these need to go hand in hand and play a role. So we have invested in a few businesses like these, but how we think of business models themselves, that has to change dramatically. It's interesting that a lot of the businesses are starting to look like enablers, almost akin to how AWS, which is one of the biggest platforms and businesses out there, has done it, rather than do everything in house and be end-to-end solution providers. So,
And Samir, if I can tack on one more, related question, which came on blended finance instruments, and I know you essentially run an organization that has both grant making and investment capabilities.
right.
Uh, do you think that blended finance instruments make sense for early stage climate businesses?
I think
What-
it's absolutely necessary because, like I said, there's a fair bit of ecosystem building that is happening as part of this as well. So, for instance, some of the entrepreneurs need to actually substitute for missing parts of the ecosystem, right? They end up playing roles that the state needs to play, and so on and so forth. And some of that has to be supported through grants and both for initial demonstrations and to convince the state to take over these roles in terms of being the larger ecosystem provider.
Either that or build a long-term sustainable business model once they reach scale.
Or that, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Johan's asking, if we're seeing an environmental justice or equity consideration in problems that climate tech startups are solving. Priya, I know you come from deep impact background in your previous work as well. Are you seeing, climate equity being a focus for climate startups, or do you think it's needed as part of the solution as we build more climate solutions?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely see more need for it. I think, in terms of spending on adaptation, resilience, and all of these sort of interconnected sectors within climate tech, I think making sure that we don't ignore the poor, the vulnerable populations, especially when we're talking about agriculture and fisheries and, even the urban environment as well, that there are many, many marginalized communities that feel the impacts of climate change a lot deeper. And I think that there needs to be solutions, that are interconnected, both with business model innovation on the startup side, but also from government and policy and nonprofit angle to help support these and making sure that we're not unfairly sort of excluding these communities from the climate discussion. So I think it's definitely much more needed as it not really present today.
But we're not seeing too much evidence of that getting built. Do you think that's because it's too difficult to solve both problems at the same time, like solving for climate and equity at the same time?
I wouldn't say it's, yeah, I mean, there are challenges definitely. I would say that the different types of capital that would go into these elements, I would say in the private sector, definitely the focus is on funding business model innovation and growing these startups from the ground and basically making these business models profitable and scalable. There's obviously a side effect of or positive side effect of these businesses then empowering the marginalized populations, for example, in the case of electric mobility and electric rickshaw drivers and the increase in incomes that you would get with much larger rollout of electric vehicles on the network, and making sure the cost of ownership is sort of driven down, etc. And that is definitely a very positive piece, but it is challenging, I would say, to solve both at the same time. I think you have different types of actors that are coming from different angles to try and solve this, in different ways.
Pratap, I see you nodding. You have a point of view on this.
Yeah, thank you. We definitely need to solve multiple issues, not just climate. There's a lot of climate justice, gender, a whole bunch of stuff. But very practically, this is some approaches I've seen, it's a recipe for failure. It's already hard enough to be an entrepreneur, right? And we work with a lot of entrepreneurs and try to talk about these issues. In fact, when you're scraping, most of these startups will fail. Every entrepreneur will maybe check off some things to get a grant, or they join an accelerator for something, but they struggle for their basic one, which is survival. So I think I don't think startups should be asked to solve multiple problems. Maybe the ecosystem could. For example, we could support, as Priya said, some more solutions that target a vulnerable community. But if you're not, I don't think anything trumps surviving more than everything else. Now, maybe put a layer to that is we do a lot of work on gender and climate. And one of the angles we looked at is the impact framework, gender and climate impact for your startup. And we tried to figure out how to tie that to a stronger business outcome, right? Not in the goal itself, because that goal itself doesn't pay a startup, a for-profit startup cash. It can help, of course, nonprofits, nonprofits can solve multiple things, climate and other goals. But when it comes to startups, I think one thing we have to remember, it's hard enough already. So I think our design when it comes to multiple is more at the ecosystem level and more startups that I don't want to repeat, but at the targets audiences or beneficiaries or customers or otherwise that we want to support, but not think of startups as nonprofits.
Fair point, Pratap. On that note, I think we have a very interesting question. And I think the question is that, do we think that we put more emphasis on making big corporations turn climate friendly than we do in financing new innovative initiatives? And how can we balance that? Whoever wants to pick that up. Go ahead, Pratap.
I didn't want to speak twice in a row, but this is an area we do work on. There's a nice report from an earlier flow of renewables International Energy Agency in 2020 called the Net Zero Report, where when you look at the innovation needed to reach net zero by 2070, most of those solutions, 2/3 of it, don't exist or just at very pilot phases. And if it's 2050, even more, meaning we need innovation, that's for sure. And a lot of this will come from the startup world for reasons that it's easier for startups. It's hard for corporates to take risks. We work with a lot of corporates in a platform called Climate Challenges Live. It's to help decarbonize corporates by getting pilots from startups to work with them. And one of the things that we hear from corporates is, I don't have all the solutions I need to decarbonize or meet my net zero goals. So they are asking for startups, right? So it's not an either or. There's a lot of things you can see, like scope 1 emissions, meaning a lot of industry, what they can solve in-house. But when they need to go to like scope 2, scope 3, oftentimes they need to work with startups and technologies that are more suitable for supply chains, logistics, et cetera, that don't come from the corporate. And I think then we can marry the two, how the startup innovation ecosystem can help corporates to reach net zero goals together. So I don't think it's either or, in my opinion.
Yes, Amir.
So this is a question that we are grappling with internally as well, to be honest. To just give an example of, for instance, the steel and the cement industries. There are net zero goals being declared by each individual player, and there are overall industry level targets that a lot of think tanks are actually creating. There are technology solutions for this. There is innovation that's happening in the space for the energy subsidy, energy transition that they need to make, the materials transition that they need to make. But then we ran into very large problems that 70% of construction in India is 2 stories or lower. And there are a dozen different alternatives that are viable and exist as even right now. So what do you want to promote? Because a lot of these solutions are localized. They not just represent a better choice of materials which are less energy hungry, they also represent a lot less transportation. They represent local IP and knowledge systems and entrepreneurship. And they represent indirectly a lot more biodiversity, right? So is it enough to support industry to do the transition? Or do you want to step back and question the mix of materials that the construction industry should have? Because the needs of a specific industry are not necessarily the needs of the planet at this point in time, right? So this is a question that we grapple with a lot internally, and we don't understand the mix yet.
Got it. Fair point. All right, I guess we have time for one final question, and this is a good one, I think, to get final short thoughts from all the panelists. So I guess the question is related to what we were discussing just before we went to Q&A, which is, how can ecosystem builders and investors, funders, and finance providers collaborate better to catalyze these conversations? I know, you already had some thought behind how to collaborate better as an ecosystem, but maybe just very short final thoughts from all of you. Priya?
Sure. So a couple of things. I mean, I think definitely an open dialogue, knowledge, insights, continuing to share with, learnings with each other. So whether it's from recent investments or from founders sharing with each other, creating these sort of founder coalition groups that can actually cross-pollinate ideas and work together. And that's one piece of it. And the other piece of it is really also looking globally for guidance and for, blueprints of what has actually worked in other markets. So US and European markets, as well as Australia, I think climate tech revolution has been a little bit more advanced over there. So it's trying to see what technologies have worked, what policy interventions have been successful, and how these companies have also raised capital through later rounds of funding. What's been the main impetus to scale? So I think a couple of these different types of learning opportunities should continue to be made available for founders especially, and then creating forums such as these where we can meet with different actors in the ecosystem and exchange ideas. So yeah, it's just some thoughts.
Thanks. Shamal, your final thoughts on how we can collaborate better.
Thank you. Actually, we need a platform where like this, but more regular meetings where actually we can exchange ideas. In PFAN in Asia, we have almost 12 countries, and we meet regularly, and we share each other's success stories, even failure stories, and try to develop from each other's experience. So if such a platform is built where the investors, the accelerators, and networks can come together, and it could be it's better to be a regular meetings and the thematic meetings to try to solve one problem at each meeting, and to where we can share our experience regarding any success stories or any failure stories, or try to brainstorm about some challenges regarding any other matter like policies or any other interventions. So in summary, we need a platform where we can exchange our ideas on a regular interval. Thank you.
Great idea, Shamal. Samir, your thoughts?
Thanks. So at the outset, I actually disagree that we need to learn from the West on this, because the fundamental difference is that business as usual, we don't have business as usual at the scale the West has. They are invested into a certain way of life, a certain way of doing business, and they are trying to make the smallest transition possible to get out of this. We have an opportunity to actually create new pathways to development, to better socioeconomic indicators, and the same tweaks at the fringe, at the periphery, are not going to cut it for us. The sooner we actually, so the convenings we need, the consensus we need is on these pathways, these indicators, so that we can start to work towards the same goals. Because from where we stand right now, we either have a choice of going ahead and arriving at these now, proactively working towards them, or being forced to respond to changes as they happen. So I think it's very important that we figure out what these pathways are.
Thanks, Amir. And Pratap, some final thoughts from you?
Yeah, great. I mean, I've only been in fintech for about a little over a decade, but I've been following this for 3 decades. Collaboration is hard. That we know. In fact, we could even see reversals in this next decade. I'm talking about the global level for sure. It's not even clear that we've won this fight, in the bigger picture. It's not clear that we brought in a lot of people as on board here in India as well. And it'll take a lot of time and effort for this. I'm a little bit, maybe I'm from the startup world, but I'm of this opinion, and we just start building on the ground, build up a critical mass of activities. This may increase the ability for us to coalesce around, let's say, what Shamir is saying is a shared pathway or a goal that we could reach. One of the things that I've seen is that, for example, when I was in the solar business, I was a developer and we were selling solar above the grid. Nobody was interested. When we were below the grid, people cared about the climate. At least they bought more solar in that sense. So I think we can do a lot of stuff on the ground to build this shared commitment. And I give an example, which is also a good way to give a shout out to Andy, is we created a climate metrics guide that was launched 2 days ago with Andy. It's to help organizations as well as startups understand how to measure climate impact. If you're an early stage technology startup, this is the gap in the market. Now, it's a small tool and it's a small effort, but it could lead to many things in the future because it may help us get together and learn how to use, for example, a shared metrics platform that we can build on. So I'm a little bit of more of a believer that the more we can build on the ground, small wins, learn how to add value to each other as people and organizations, that over time our ability to do something bigger improves. Yeah.
On that encouraging note, I will say thanks to all of you for this super insightful session and head back to the Andy team. Cypriya, Sucharita, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Simi. And I know we're 2 minutes over time, so we'll not keep everyone on for too long. Huge thank you to the speakers for working with us and your participation on this discussion. There were a lot more questions that due to the paucity of time, we were not able to get to. So we will try to circulate this among the speakers and get across responses in the follow-up emails that we will share. And thank you to the participants as well. The link to the next session, which is looking at the role of government support for the SGB ecosystem, is starting at 3:30 p.m. IST. So we look forward to seeing your continued participation. And thank you again, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.